In this part of the Module 5 lecture recording, I'd like to talk to you about the two examples where we will apply the binomial probability formula to calculate probabilities. So this is the example that we discussed in the previous recording. And in here, as we saw before, we're considering the effectiveness of performing an anterior cruciate ligament surgery of the knee. And then we know that 3 surgeries were selected at random. We know that the probability of success of this type of surgery is 0.85, that the surgeries are performed following a very strict protocol, and the interest in this study is the frequency of failure. So they're asking us to determine the probability that exactly one surgery fails and determine the probability that all 3 surgeries fail. All right, let's see first, and this is what I recommend you do. Whenever you are presented with a problem, the very first thing is verify the conditions of the experiment so that you know what probability distribution is appropriate. As we will see later, the hypergeometric distribution is very similar to the binomial, so you have to be careful how you characterize the experiment. And the same when we apply the Poisson probability distribution, you have to verify the conditions to apply that probability distribution. So the very first step in solving problems in this chapter is determining the conditions of the experiment to determine what probability distribution can be used. Right. In this case, as we saw previously, we have 3 identical trials. We have the success in this case is the surgery fails, and the failure is that the surgery succeeds. So the probability of a surgery failing is 0.15, and the probability of a successful surgery is 1 minus pi, which is 0.85. So we saw that the surgeries are independent, and also we see that the random variable counts the number of failed surgeries. So you could have 0 failures, 1, 2, or 3 failed surgeries. All right, so we verified before, and now you can see again that this is a binomial experiment. So we can use the binomial formula to calculate the probabilities. All right, so we want to find the probability that exactly one surgery fails. That is, the probability that the random variable is equal to 1. All right, so this combination part of the formula is telling us how many sequences we can obtain with one failure or one failed surgery. Now, since we have one failed surgery, so the probability of failure is 0.15 to the 1 power, and we have 3 surgeries minus 1 that is failing, so there'd be 2 successful surgeries, so that 0.85 to the square. All right, so we expand the combination formula, and then we have the different probabilities of this event. So you carry out this calculation and you obtain 0.325125, or we can say, and remember, always interpret the probabilities that you calculate. So the interpretation of this number is that the probability that exactly one surgery fails is 0.325 or 32.5%. Now, in part B, they're asking us to determine the probability that all 3 surgeries fail. And again, using the binomial formula, we obtain the probability that the random variable is equal to 3. Then we have the combination, which counts the number of sequences where we have 3 failed surgeries in 3 surgeries. Well, of course, that is only one possible sequence. And then we're looking for 3 failed surgeries, so the probability of failure is 0.15, and that is to the 3rd power, and then 0.85. And because all 3 surgeries failed, there is no surgeries that are actually successful, so 0.5 is to the 0 power. Again, you carry out the calculation, and you find that this is 0.03375. And the probability that all 3 surgeries fail is 0.00338 or 0.338%. All right, so this is an example that we looked at before, but now we're using the binomial formula to calculate the probabilities. Let's look at another problem. All right, in this problem, in an inspection of automobiles in San Antonio, 60% of all automobiles had emissions that do not meet the EPA regulations. That means they failed the emissions test. So for a random sample of 5 automobiles, that is 5 automobiles were independently selected from the same population, they're asking us to, number one, verify that this is in fact a binomial experiment. They're asking us to find the probability that all 5 automobiles failed inspection, probability that 3 of the 5 failed inspection, the probability that 2 or more failed inspection, and the probability that at most 4 of them failed inspection. All right, let's solve this problem. So the very first thing is determine if this is a binomial experiment. Well, we have a trial is just an emissions test, and they're performed identically. So we can say that we have 5 identical trials. So that's the first condition. We have only 2 outcomes. Either the car fails or the car passes the emission test. So we have the second condition. The probability of failing the test is 0.06, which that is a success. And the probability of passing the test is 1 minus pi, which is 0.4. That's the probability of failure. All right. So the results of the test, the result of one test does not affect another test because we selected this test at random. Now, the random variable counts the number of automobiles that failed the emission test. So the possible values of the random variable is either 0 cars failed, 1 car fails, 2 fail, all the way to all 5 cars failing the emissions test. So these are the possible values of the random variable. All right, keep that in mind because this is going to be important as we calculate probabilities. All right, so let's solve part B. So what is the probability that all 5 automobiles fail the inspection? All right, so in this case, we're looking for the probability of the random variable being equal to 5. So here's the count of the number of sequences in which 5 cars will fail, which there be only 1. The probability of success, we're looking for all successes, so pi is to the 5 power, and the probability of failure will be to the 0 power because there are no cars passing the test in this particular case. So then this factorial is reduced to 1, and then 0.6 to the 5 power and 0.4 to the 0 power, which is 1. If you carry out that calculation, you get 0.0776. So the probability of all cars that all 5 cars do not meet the EPA emissions standard is 0.778 or 7.8%. Now, the next question is, what is the probability that exactly 3 of the 5 cars failed the inspection? So now in this case, we have the probability that random variable is equal to 3. So now we need to figure out how many sequences of 3 cars failing the test there might be in 5 cars being tested. Since there are 3 successes, so the probability of success is to the 3rd power, and the probability of the car of failure, which is the car passing the test, will be 5 minus 3, because 3 pass, 2 must fail. All right, so again, you expand the combination formula, and then you carry out the calculation, and you find that the result is 0.3456. So the probability that 3 of the 5 cars not meeting the EPA emission standard is 0.346 or 34.6%, where I rounded this number to 0.346. All right, so this is the answer to part B. Part C, it says, what is the probability of 2 or more cars failing the test? So 2 or more means that the random variable can take up values of 2 or larger. So now remember, the possible number of failure goes from 0 to 5. So the probability of the random variable being 2 or more is equal to the probability of x equal to 2, the random variable equals to 3, equals to 4, and equals to 5. And we sum those probabilities. All right, so this requires calculating 4 separate probabilities and adding them together. So a simpler calculation will be to use using the complement of the event x larger or equal than 2. So there are 5 possible outcomes or 5 possible values of the random variable. So we have 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is excluding 0 and 1. So the complement of the probability of x being larger or equal than 2 is the x being less than or equal to 1. So using the complement, what we have is 1 minus the probability that x is equal to 0 plus the probability that x is equal to 1. And I'm putting this within brackets because we're subtracting the addition of these two probabilities from 1. Okay, so then we calculate the probability that the random variable is 0 and the probability that the random variable is equal to 1. Again, I write the binomial formula for each case, and then I expand the factorials and the probabilities and the corresponding powers. So I carry out these calculations and I obtain 0.913. So the probability that 2 or more cars that do not meet the EPA emission standard is 0.913 or 91.3%. All right, and now let's do the last part, part E. So the probability that at most 4 cars, that is, the random variable is less than or equal to 4, fail the inspection is all the values of x from 0 to 4. So again, if you look at these numbers, the random variable takes on the value of 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. From the possible values of the random variable goes from 0 to 5. So this is excluding only 5. So we can use the complement of x less than or equal to 4, which is x equal to 5. So then we have just a single calculation. So to do that, then we use the complement. So the probability x less than or equal to 4 is just 1 minus the probability that x is equal to 5. Then we do 1 minus expanding or using the binomial formula, we have this quantity, and then carry out the calculation, and then you find that this is 0.9222. So the probability that at most 4 of the 5 cars do not meet the EPA emission standard is 0.922 or 92.2%. All right. Again, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to look at another example in the next recording. But one thing that should be clear in your mind is that you should be able to calculate these factorials and these powers using your calculator. So if you have a calculator like mine, there will be a key that calculates factorials. If not, then you have to do that calculation yourselves by using the definition of the factorials. Again, make sure you know how to do these calculations using your calculator, whatever calculator you have, except your telephone. The telephone is not allowed as a calculator during an exam. So if you have questions on using your calculator, let me know. I can help you. All right, I will stop here and then we'll continue with another example in the next recording.